Thank you. Ahas, insights, light bulb moments. All these seemingly random events can actually serve to move us closer to or further from our dreams. And often they occur to us as questions. The first aha moment I can remember happened in my 4th grade classroom. Can you tell it was the 70s? I'm the one in the middle with the pigtails. There I was, a curious 10-year-old, with what I believe to be a very important and compelling question. Mrs. H, why is a $sign an S with a line through it? Now, like any great, if somewhat frustrated 4th grade teacher, I'm sure she said something like, Jodee, look it up. But what I heard was, what kind of question is that? If you have to ask a question like that, then you're not very smart. There was what happened, and there was the story I made up about what happened. And that story became my truth. Now, what happens when okay, that's where I want to just, this is so cool to be able to do this like this. So when faced with moments of truth, what do most people do? They fall into reaction mode. Our reactions come from our emotions, and they don't even require any thought. Our limbic system is made up of those fight or flight impulses. We can either fight when we feel threatened, or we can leave, neither of which ever leads to a different outcome. When faced with that moment of truth, what do? Do you allow your limbic system, your reptile brain, to take over? Or do you respond from your thinking brain? I bet you've sat quietly in a boardroom or a classroom and chosen not to ask that question that's burning in your mind. Instead of that question, the voice in your head gets busy with questions like, what are they going to think if they know I don't know the answer? Or, am I the only one who isn't figuring this out? We've been conditioned for so long to look outside ourselves for the answer that we've given in too quickly to what we already know how to do. We've sacrificed our own why, our own purpose, and our own values. I don't have to take responsibility for any how question because I'm looking for someone else's idea or suggestion or solution. Without my why firmly established, no one's how is ever going to fit. Now, how different would our world look today if these guys, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, had been afraid to ask questions, to challenge the status quo? These guys were the wizards of Silicon Valley in the 80s, and they grew up as the hippies and the free spirits of the 60s. They didn't ask permission. They just had an idea, followed it, and created their own solutions. If the first idea didn't work, they just kept going. These free spirits and hippies of the 60s were just crazy enough to believe that they could change the world. And you know what? They did. In fact, today in Silicon Valley, it's often said that questions are the new answers. Business consultant and author Peter Block tells us that while questions the question, how do I do this, is valuable, but questions that begin with how are actually a defense against action. I bet those wizards of Silicon Valley didn't worry about those how questions. They were much more interested in the why questions that led to purpose and depth. What do you do when you're faced with a dilemma? Do you fall into that, oh, dang it. Okay. This is going to be hard to edit, but we're going to try it again. Have you heard the riddle, what do you do when you find yourself in a hole? Answer, stop digging. But for many of us, that would mean stopping. And what we do when we find ourselves in a situation where things aren't working the way we'd like them to do, we just keep busy. We keep digging. Instead of getting closer to the top of the hole, we do more of what got us there in the first place, and we find ourselves deeper and deeper inside. Your life is yours. and the results you can expect are up to you. Instead of desperately pursuing an ordinary, normal existence, what if you took that ordinary experience of life and just added a little something extra? Extraordinary, just more of ordinary. That just means it's okay not to know. Instead of looking behind you to try to fix something that's already happened, what if you just sat in the not knowing and asked better questions of yourself? I bet these guys didn't have all the answers. This is Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone. In the early 1900s, those three got together 2 or 3 times a week to actually help each other with those crazy ideas each of them was having. Henry Ford actually said, "Thinking is the hardest work we're ever going to do," which is why so few people do it. Although he wasn't formally educated himself, he knew exactly where to go to find whatever answer he needed whenever he needed it. Harvey Firestone, he firmly believed that people's greatest assets are their ideas. He once said, "The way of the pioneer is always rough," and he should know, having been the first global manufacturer of automobile tires. And Edison, he said that restlessness and discontent are the first necessities of progress. Don't you suppose that the reason he invented all those things he invented was in answer to the questions he had about the way things were? Now, curious leaders would rather pursue those questions that lead to purpose and meaning than to find the answers in hopes of getting acknowledged. And sensationally curious leaders have the additional skills of being reflective, perceptive, and receptive. They know exactly how to dig deeper to the core of any issue because they keep asking themselves and others that vital question, how? Now, you can't transform what you don't even know, so please take a look at what you yourself are thinking. What questions occur to you when no one else is around? Is the voice in your head a friendly one or a judgmental one? What do you love and what inspires you? All of these are simply clues to the possibilities that already exist inside of you and can't come alive until they're recognized. Which voice calls louder to you, the voice of fear or the voice of faith? Now, I love the theme of this TEDx event, Pivot. I learned a lot about pivoting as a basketball player right here on this very campus. When you pivot in basketball, you plant one foot, leaving the other one free to explore and hopefully get around the defense. Now, I had a crossover move when I played here that allowed me to cover a lot of ground. Once in a while, I covered so much ground that the official called me for traveling, taking too many steps. Now, while I don't believe that's true, once in a while the official thought better of that. So in basketball, the violation of traveling is called when you take too many steps away from your pivot foot. In life, that happens when you take too many steps away from your grounding, your core values. But how will you know how far is too far unless you're willing to take that step? If you decide to stay firmly planted in what you already believe right now, then you will never have the opportunity to pivot, to see things differently. You'll never have the violation called on you, sure, and you'll get to be right about that, but you'll also never have the opportunity to see anything beyond where your current beliefs have taken you. If you ever think in your mind, I wonder, without actually taking that step around the defense, you'll be forced to live your life in the stands as an observer instead of on the court and in the game as a participant. Now, when you feel that opportunity to pivot and something happens in your own life that causes you to think differently, here are some things you can think about so that you can get from where you are to where you're going. First, notice what you notice. Notice what calls your attention. All of this information in form and inspiration in spirit is there to wake you up. Are you ready to be awakened, or are you fighting desperately to go back to sleep? Just notice what calls your attention. Secondly, ask good questions. These are those questions that get to the core, your big why. Ask them first of yourself so that you understand yourself, and then, and only then, seek out the people, the resources, and the mentors who can help you get where you're going. You'll never know what's possible if you don't ask, but make sure those are good questions. And finally, commit to transformation as opposed to change. Change looks backward and tries to change the things that have already happened, tries to fix them, while transformation stands in the present and creates the future from right now. When you allow yourself the opportunity to step into your greatness, you'll find that your life can be better than you ever could have imagined. Now, as for the dollar sign back in 4th grade, I did look it up, and I learned something that day. And I've learned something every day since. And one of the most important things I've learned is that the pursuit of knowledge is way more important than that one right answer. So when you find yourself in that position, what are you going to do? Why is what's important to you? And why is that important to you and to the world? When you dig just a little deeper than ordinary, you'll find that you're able to give and receive that little extra. So when you meet the president of your college, or the president of your company, or even the president of the United States, what question will you have for him or her? When you cause someone else to think, you create an impression. But when you cause yourself to think, you inspire a legacy. Your life will either be an example or a warning. Which will you choose? Thank you.